Yes, this is a great one because we're really missing a trick, us women, if we don't kind of leverage the way we eat and exercise to optimize our hormone production. Because, our hormones affect everything, don't they? So we really need to look at, what's happening throughout the cycle and the best ways to kind of optimize the hormones that are being produced during those 28 days.
So I'm extremely excited today to have a chat with our beautiful Annelie. You know, Annelie is our go-to for our women's issues, our hormones. She is the hormone queen. And I wanted to have a chat with her about how we can eat and exercise in sync with our hormones. So we're at our best. Because I know that throughout my cycle, there's times where, I don't really want to know. And I know it's my body kind of telling me, but I'm not sure why that is, or why I'm more hungry, or why I don't feel like exercising. So I thought it would be great for us to have a chat with Annelie, our expert, and just understand, how this works and how we can best work with ourselves. So, Annelie, how can you help us on this subject?
Yes, this is a great one because we're really missing a trick, us women, if we don't kind of leverage the way we eat and exercise to optimize our hormone production. Because, our hormones affect everything, don't they? So we really need to look at, what's happening throughout the cycle and the best ways to kind of optimize the hormones that are being produced during those 28 days. So quite simply, from days 1 to 14, okay, of the cycle. So 1 being the day you get your period, you bleed, and 14 being the day that most women ovulate, 14, 15, 16. So those first kind of 14, 16 days are called the follicular phase, okay? Because this is us building up to creating and releasing another follicle, yeah, and ovulating, and then possibly getting pregnant, or then going into the second phase. So this first phase, days 1 to 14, is what we call like the low hormone phase, and actually this is the phase where we are most powerful. This is the phase where we have less appetite, where we are just more energized because we've got lower hormones. In fact, we're kind of more like men in this phase. So this is the perfect time. And I always say with women, when we're doing in my metabolic mastery groups, I always try and start women with things like possibly intermittent fasting. So they're having bigger fasting windows where they're starting their exercise programs in this phase, because it's easier, because we have a lower hormone production. So we're not victim to cravings, and because our hormones are just much lower, and our energy is higher because our hormones are a bit lower, but also we don't have any progesterone in the first phase. And progesterone is, it kind of suppresses us. It's quite an inflammatory hormone, actually, in some ways. And it's a potent kind of stimulator of appetite. So those first 2 weeks, I always say, if we're going to break it down into 2 weeks being the follicular and 2 weeks being the luteal, the first 2 weeks is where we want to be kind of going lower carb. This is the perfect time if you want to start a kind of weight loss program, or, any kind of dietary changes. It's easy, much, much easier. So this is the phase where you can have kind of lower carbohydrate, because your body's much more able to access glycogen and burn fat. And also, this is the phase where you can have kind of a higher, more like a kind of keto style diet. So lower carb, higher fat, moderate protein. That works best for most women. It also optimizes and leverages your kind of biochemical state. So you can burn more fat, you can become more insulin sensitive, so you can get your blood sugar sorted much more easily in this phase if you eat in those kind of ratios, really focus in on a higher fat, moderate protein, kind of lower carb style of diet, the keto kind of style. And also in this phase is when we can train harder, go faster, because we can access all this glycogen. So it's a really good time to do our sprints, to do, good high intensity resistance work. So I always say to women, especially athlete runners, this is your phase where you really push it, do your hardest training. Don't then try and do it. Don't start your training schedule, which is super intense, in the final week of your cycle, because you're going to feel inflamed and tired and exhausted. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that luteal phase. So once we've ovulated, and by the way, let's just talk about ovulation, because a lot of women don't realize this. We're actually at our most powerful during ovulation, not just in our physical body, but in our mental body. So it's a very good day for doing, podcasts, doing interviews, being articulate, being able to, do public speaking, being able to focus really hard. Our brain is, at its best. So that's a good tip. But also when we're ovulating, we have this kind of surge of estrogen. So our ligaments can be really loose. So I always say, just especially if you're doing a lot of, intense training, be careful in that ovulation phase, not to do too much kind of jumping, like plyometric work, or, anything that's too much on your ligaments, because they're much looser. So you can have more injuries. Actually, more injuries happen during the ovulation phase in women than they do at any other phase, which is quite interesting. But then we ovulate, and then we produce what we call a corpus luteum, which is where the progesterone is secreted. So then we have this kind of rise of both, a bit of estrogen drops off and then progesterone kind of rises. And so this is when we feel a bit more fatigued. And some women actually feel awful after ovulation because their estrogen drops too quickly. And so that's quite an interesting phase where women can feel quite tired or kind of sad and blue. They can even feel kind of like, they're about to get their period. It's that kind of PMS-y time. But anyway, after that, the progesterone rises, and then our appetite increases. And this is normal. And this is because ostensibly we're growing another organ. We're growing an endometrium in case we get pregnant to catch the baby. Yeah. So our needs for B vitamins, our needs for good fats, and our needs for protein goes up. So this is where this is the paleo phase. So if you think about the first 2 weeks being the keto phase, this is more of the kind of paleo phase, as in increase your protein. It's a high protein, moderate carb, more of a lower fat phase. That's what we should be doing, because we then won't succumb to these intense cravings. Because how in the luteal phase, often in week 3, 4, women are like, oh my God, I've got to eat a whole bar of chocolate. Oh my God, I can't control myself. I've eaten half a loaf of bread. And the reason it's happened is because their amino acid reserve is low. So they're having lower protein. So they're craving more carbohydrate because the body is looking for more energy. So it's much smarter to get a higher amino acid reserve into your body so you have less cravings. Don't go too low carbohydrate, because the progesterone is stimulating appetite to grow this endometrium. So carbohydrate is, you need a bit of carbohydrate, you need a good amount. Every evening, I always say in the luteal phase, make sure you have your carbohydrates: sweet potatoes, brown rice, all the root veggies, possibly some cooled white rice, which is really good resistant starch. Don't skip on your carbs in the luteal phase, because you will succumb to those very intense cravings in week 4. And exercise wise, we all do feel a little bit more we have more water retention, we have more sodium loss, and because of progesterone. So we need to work out in a really smart way. So I always say, do very short, like 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on what your fitness level's like, of intense kind of resistance work, so weightlifting. So you're optimizing muscle protein synthesis. So you're, keeping your muscle nice and healthy and helping to build it, but you're not exhausting yourself. Trying to get on a treadmill or trying to do a 10K run day, week 3, week 4, it's going to be pretty tough for most women. I mean, we're all different, and you've got to do what suits you. But, the most important thing is to make sure that your diet is optimized in that second phase. Starting to go on a fast or go keto, or go on some very extreme low calorie cleanse. Never, ever do that in the luteal phase. So this is a higher protein, moderate carbohydrate. We don't need so many fats kind of, way of eating, but also to make sure that we get all those B vitamins and we get enough iron so that when we do have our bleed, we're not borderline anemic. So, that last week, I always say to women, if you eat meat, have lots of grass-fed meat, have chicken livers. And if you're a vegetarian, just optimize on those iron-rich foods, like lentils and beetroot and spinach and, unsulfured apricots, and, really make that final week, that week 4, just so nutrient dense. And that also really helps with the bleed. And, when you eat like this, especially with this higher protein diet and this more nutrient dense kind of way of eating for the last 2 weeks, you see so much less PMS, whether that's feeling, blue, or whether that's feeling irritable, or whether that's cramping when you get your period. It massively is reduced. In my clinical experience anyway, women's PMS is really kind of alleviated by having optimizing this kind of, this way of eating.
Fantastic. I love that. I was just in trance listening to you then. And we all know when we don't do it. We all know what it feels like to have that horrible PMT, or, to look in the mirror and just, or not be able to do your trousers up because you feel so bloated, or it's just horrible. And if we can avoid that in really simple, easy ways by just, adapting our diet or our exercise, amazing. Why wouldn't we ever not do that?
Well, because most women don't know where they're at even in their cycle. Yeah. And I think that's why, these apps are actually really good to know. Yes. And it's I think if you just think of it like this, first 2 weeks, low hormone phase, second 2 weeks, high hormone phase. What does that mean? It means lower hormones, we're more like men, we can get away with it, we can go faster, you could, and in fact, in those first 2 weeks, if you are a female athlete, you can actually eat a lot more carbohydrates because your body just burns. You're much more insulin sensitive. And in those second 2 weeks, you have to remember that if you've got higher hormones, and this is one thing I didn't mention, but your liver, that does all the detoxification, phase 1, phase 2, is under more stress. So one other thing I would say is be mindful about putting in, too much, this is not the phase to be eating like any processed food, but things that weigh the liver down, like alcohol. So you always get much worse hangovers in your luteal phase because your liver is having to detoxify all these hormones. So there's much more pressure on it. So, you'll notice, and women often say to me, I'm not great at drinking, but sometimes I can drink, and I can drink loads and I feel great. And other times I feel terrible. And I always say to them, well, and it's always the way that it was in their first 2 weeks that they felt fine. And then on week 4, they felt terrible. And it's often as well when you crave in week 4, you kind of want to drink and eat crisps and chocolate, but that is a lot to do with the fact that, you just haven't put the work in with this, higher protein kind of, really good, healthy carbohydrate kind of diet. So yeah, be mindful because you're much more likely to have for your liver and your digestive system to be more compromised in that final phase. So you want to look after it, take some liver herbs, take some, support your liver with milk thistle, support your liver with kind of dandelion teas, take probiotics. A B complex is also a very good idea in the luteal phase. Yeah. Okay. Keep your energy up.
There's lots of different topics have just come to me. I'm like, oh my God, we need to have a talk about this. Oh my God, we need to have a talk about that. And I think that, or I really feel that there's so much for us to learn. Yes, so much for us to learn. I'd love to have a session with you and talk about, because I work with a lot of women around the whole alcohol thing, and how and why when you're younger, it's fine. And as you get older, anxiety comes up around drinking, this kind of waking up with anxiety and anxiousness and hot sweats and not being able to sleep. And like, why is that? Is there ways that we can work with it? I think that would be a great topic for us to talk about in the future. I also, as you was talking, I was like, okay, right. When I'm organizing date night, I know why it has to be in those first 2 weeks. Now it just has to be, in those last 2 weeks, emotionally, I'm not quite as good as I am in the first few weeks, food wise and alcohol wise. Like, let's put it in the first 2 weeks. Let's have fun then. In the last
Or
2 weeks.
around ovulation time is actually the best time for date nights. Because you're most energized and you're most, also your sex drive is the highest, because your testosterone is peaking.
Yes. And we quite know when we're ovulating, because it's that moment then we go, oh, come on. It's like it's an internal drive for a woman.
Yes. And often it's interesting because in perimenopause, when the sex drive can often wane because testosterone is dropping, if often women will say to me, there's only like once a month is fine for me, and it's always around ovulation. And I always say, well, make sure, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So make sure that you do something about that.
There's another topic. We need to talk about sex. We need to talk about sex, perimenopausal, menopausal, whatever, whenever. We need to talk about alcohol. And there was something else that came up. I'm not sure, but I remember. Oh, also, I'd love to talk to you more about the kind of mood swings, and how we can really support ourselves with those mood swings, and why, and I mean, I'm sure that the whole diet and exercise, if you're eating and exercising to support your cycle. But I do know that, as you say, sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, that was a real rocking cycle, that one. And other times it's like, oh yeah, that was fine. That was, that was okay.
Well, I mean, there's just that, you can do, I'd say 80% of optimizing your 80% of your cycle. And your cycle, by the way, when I say your cycle, like your period, is kind of like a health report card. So it shows you, depending on what it was, how it was, if it was crampy, if it was bad, if you were very emotional, if it was, you had lots of clots and it was painful and heavy. That's your report card, your health report card. So, but I would say 80% of what you can do to optimize all of that can be done with diet and exercise and lifestyle. But then there's another piece that we will get into another day, but this is around your genes, actually. There's genetics, what we call your single nucleotide polymorphisms, and they actually, and this is to do with liver detoxification and helping to detoxify your hormones. And then, of course, there is... so every woman has a different way of detoxifying their estrogen, for example. So this is why the Dutch test, I do this as the bulk of my work with women, because it gives us the skinny on what is going on and why suddenly people get moody. Oh, it's because estrogen's dropped too quickly, or there's not enough progesterone, or or the cortisol. That's another thing. Stress is massive, because at the end of it all, what influences our whole hormonal milieu is where we are at. Well, this, where we are at with our stress response system, like how robust are we with coping with stress? How resilient are we? How much, time do we put into that? Taking the pause where we tell our body that it's safe, because, women, we are reproductive creatures, like it or not. And that's why that's kind of, not why we're here, but that's what our body is designed to do. So if the body is stressed, the body's going to, there's going to be a signal that it's not safe to make a baby in this body. So that obviously changes and upsets the whole hormonal milieu, whether you're trying for a baby or not. So stress, affects us much more than men. And this is why, and we can talk about that because another time too, because, and this is why in the Dutch, the Dutch is so important, because you can see how much cortisol people are making and how much they can use and what the body prefers, cortisol or cortisone, the inactive form, and all of these kinds of things. So you can tell a lot from women's symptoms, but also testing is very helpful. But the best thing, obviously, and we all know this, is just to have boundaries, stop before, we hit the wall.
And look after ourselves.
I mean, especially as we're hitting our phase, once you hit 38 onwards, this is a window of opportunity. It's so important. The work needs to be, if you haven't dialed in your diet, you haven't dialed in what's got your hormonal imbalances, you haven't dialed in, your kind of sex life with your partner, or if you've got one, or, you haven't dialed in all of that, just kind of the whole sexual side of things. That's really, really important. You haven't dialed in all of these things, which is so important for you to have a kind of, great kind of lifestyle. So you know what you like, you know what you don't like. You've got to get that sorted, because if you don't, there's a lot of women walking around with autoimmune diseases or walking around with digestive problems, and they just leave it and they think it'll sort of go away. But actually, as your hormones start to decline, or they go roller coaster like, which is in that perimenopause, everything else gets worse. So this is the time to sort it out. And it's incredible, because if you sort it out, you arrive at the menopause party and it's awesome, and you're rocking out into that second spring, which is one of the most powerful times in a woman's life, which is why I love doing what I do, because I want to get women to the menopause just going, oh my goodness, this is great, rather than going, oh no, this is what everyone told me it was going to be, washed up, tired, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't have a life. That's what we want to avoid. So anyway,
I wouldn't say that I'd be excited to arrive at the menopause party, but when you speak about it like that, it feels like it'll be okay.
No. The menopause is the most, I would say, apart from, I would say it's a similar thing, pre-puberty and menopause, the most powerful times in our life.
Okay. All right. I'm going to rock it. I'll go fancy dress or something.
We're more like men. In fact, we talked about that follicular phase. Yeah, we've got low hormones. Those first 5 days of our period, day 1 being the day we bleed, day 5 being, day 5, that's kind of what we're like. That's where our hormones are kind of at in menopause. They're at their lowest point. So as long as they're in balance, and as long as we've got our adrenal health good, and we've dialed in our diet, and we know what suits us, we're rocking it. We're not under the influence of this anymore.
Yeah, great.
It's pretty powerful. Women don't see it like that, but that's what I'm really passionate about, kind of, showing them so that they can look forward to it. But as long as we put in the work, So anyway, so a lot to discuss, but
we have lots to discuss. I've got on my list: alcohol, sex, stress, alcohol, sex, alcohol, sex. I'm a Scorpio, sex.
Let's just talk about those two. But if women just try, and those, just for now, taking that advice around cycle driven eating, it's such a, you can really optimize your female advantage, there. Yeah.
Amazing. I love chatting with you. I love your little bits of inspiration. I will get my little app going on my phone and go, right, okay, where am I at? Well, let's go keto tonight. Let's not forget the carbohydrates in that luteal phase. Really, really important, because a lot of women are on low carb, right? They go on jump on these low carb, and it works. I'm doing so well, chicken salads for 2 weeks, and then they're like, oh no, I'm eating the chicken salad and I feel I want chocolate, because you can't do the same thing all the time, and we mustn't anyway. We must just pause things and switch things up, but working with the hormones is really a smart way to do it. Exciting stuff. All right, gorgeous lady, thank you so much. I look forward to connecting with you very soon, and alcohol and sex it will be.
Awesome.
Thanks, gorgeous.
Have a great week. Bye.